Alright, so this is the VFX shot that we'll be doing today. This lady walking away with, now she has a knife in her hand, but I thought it'd be fun to add a knife into his back here. Okay, so the first things first that you're going to notice, he is actually still breathing, which would be a continuity issue. I like how his fingers twitch, so creatively I'm going to say that I don't want him to be breathing, but his fingers twitching are okay. Let's go ahead and just roto out his back area here. But yeah, this is, I've just been rotoing this out, and then this is already a freeze frame, so that way I can go ahead and drop this in. Okay, so that looks fine. Let's auto alpha that, and let's see what we got here. So essentially what we're going to do, and you're going to notice there's actually a big problem here, is that since the light is flickering, that the area in which we freeze frame is not flickering as well. When it goes bright here, I'm going to want the back to match that brightness. And currently we could already see on frame 107 is a good example of this frame. Lucky enough for us, his body doesn't adjust or move that much. So we're going to use this as a reference frame for when it's bright, and then we'll have a dark version of the frame as well. So let's go ahead and go into our read node here, and we're going to add in a curve tool. I want to find an area that is fairly contrasty that's lighting up pretty well. We could see that on this couch back here that it's lighting up as the light hits it. And I think that's going to be a good area for us to like check real quick and make our adjustments again. So let's go to the area where it does light up. And I'm going to just move our curve tools adjustment to the pixels in which that is happening. So let's move that down. And ideally, we're just going to want this area right up here against the couch. And now if we hit average intensities and we track this throughout the entire scene, what's going to happen is that it will create our intensity data based off of that part of the couch. Now, we can test this by, let's say we take a constant, and we can say we want this constant's color, we'll add an expression, to be set to our curve tool, intensity data, and that takes the intensity data right here and places it directly inside of this constant. And then more than likely, we're going to want to multiply this by something like 25. Now, what we're going to see is that when it's off, it's lower, it's 0.85, but then when it's on, it's 1.2. So we could actually probably make this more extreme between the on and off version of it. So let's go ahead and edit this expression, and then let's add in like, let's just make this an int. So now on 107, it's set to 1, but then on 105, it's set to 0. So now, instead of using this on our constant here, we can actually just go delete this, but I'm going to copy this expression that we just created here on this constant. We were basically using this as our visualization of how it would work. But we want to basically apply that to a merge node that's going to be merging between frame 1000 and frame 1007. And we can do that, again, just by having the two here. I'm going to go to our merge node, and we're going to edit our mix here to essentially, because again, it's just out of 1 here, we're going to edit this as add an expression, and then we'll just paste the one that we already created, which is taking that curve data and multiplying it by 25. And that, what it's going to do is on frame 1006, we don't have it, and frame 1007, if we're just looking at this merge node, it's basically just merging that lighting on top of it. Now, go ahead and just replace this with that merge node. I think that's going to make it so that way, when we watch our footage back here, his body should flicker at the same time as the rest of the environment. We might want the fall off of our roto here on his buttocks to be a little bit more, so that way we're not seeing too much of a line. We'll add a keyframe here, and then that way it's always on the first frame. And I'm going to import our image as plane. And now inside of Blender, I'm going to use cycles. Then also I'm going to ensure that our color management is set up to ASYS. This is using the same ASYS config file that I showed inside of Nuke. So now if I'm going to add a new window here so you guys can see what I'm doing. Scale this up, and let's set this to 2048 by 1080. So we're just going to be viewing directly our visual effect shot. Now everything is dark right now, but that's kind of expected. The reason why is because I'm basing it off of a shader. So let's go ahead and delete this and then just plug the image directly in. Now this color should match 1-for-1 with the, oh well actually it won't, because as it's importing it as linear sRGB, and we happen to know that it's ASYS CG. So if we tag it as ASYS CG and we go back to our Nuke comp, you'll notice that the color matches perfectly. Step 2 is that we only have our picture here. I'm going to move this further away, and we'll go ahead and scale this up. We're going to be using this as our lighting reference. After we do that, I want to project it from view. We need to now set up lighting. If I add in a cube just for reference, you'll notice that it's very dark and it doesn't match our scene whatsoever. We need to take the lighting from our visual effects shot and project that into our 3D world. Let's go to our world settings inside of Blender, and we can see that the color option right here is really dark gray, and that's what's being reflected onto this cube. So the first thing we want to do is just add in an environmental texture. So in order for us to be able to fix this, we're just going to load in the same exact EXR file that we're using in our shot here. And that will kind of get us roughly in the world of the environment that we want to be in. You'll notice though that it's actually orienting everything kind of incorrectly here. So we're getting this green light behind us rather than on the other side where the window is supposed to be. So we can actually fix that by going into our shader editor, and we can go over to world options is essentially what we want to choose. Instead of object, swap it over to world. And inside of our world options, let's add in a mapping node and a texture coordinate. And this will allow us to rotate everything around. But I think if you add in a UV sphere, but yeah, if we just rotate this by, 180 degrees, that'll place the window behind us, the window behind the cube, and that's going to create more proper lighting to how the actual environment should be. So we're going to do a few things ourselves. First, let's go ahead and add in some lighting, but we're going to be using this image as our reference, because we're going to try to match this as much as possible. I'm going to first delete our cube, and then we're going to add in a UV sphere. So if I grab this and just move this over, and grab this and move this here, one thing that I want to do with this is let's add in a new material and make this in complete, no, not metallic, but remove the roughness completely. Remove shade smoothness. And so now this is going to make a perfectly reflective material that we can use to see if it's lighting in our world correctly. Oops, I'm actually animating accidentally. Also, just for our sake, let's just remove the pass-through so that way you can see exactly what we're doing here. So I'm thinking if we add in an area light, let's rotate this on the y-axis here. We're just going to kind of place it where that window is. So if I just increase the intensity on that, we're just going to try to get this light edge that we are getting around our actual real-life objects, but we want it to be on our CG material. So if I just get that green texture there, I'm just going to move a little bit of that as well. And then a few other things we're going to want to do is let's go ahead and add in a ground plane down here. We'll scale this up. And again, if we hide that real quick, we'll add in a new material, call this floor. Since we're color managed, we can just use the color picker tool, and we really just want to get these brown tones that'll be popping up on the bottom of our sphere to allow it to set in the scene a little bit better. So Alt H that. And this, I'm going to make the roughness all the way up. Let's delete our light here real quick. That green light is pretty intense, so I did remove that. But this darker ground plane down here is allowing us to reflect a little bit better. I'm going to add in a new collection that's just going to be for lighting. And if we grab our plane that we don't want to see, I'm going to just enable indirect lighting, and that way we're not going to see any of the stuff that's reflecting from the bottom that's in our environment. The only other thing is we do want to rough out the location in which this guy is on the ground, so let's do that real quick. And so then again, I'm just going to add a new color in here, and if I hide that real quick, I do want to select this yellow t-shirt as our shirt, and we'll go ahead and place this under our lighting. Let's add in another sun, I think, and we're just going to kind of match this lighter light that is off camera. We're probably going to make it a little bit more yellow tungsten to match our scene a little bit better, and then we might even half the lighting just a little bit, so that way it's kind of just a nice soft cascading light onto our scene. So we can take these spheres, and I'm just going to create a collection called ref, and that way we can just turn this off from our renders. Might even also turn it off from our view displays. Alright, now I already downloaded the project files for our knife that we will be using. So now we're just going to set up this in our shot. And then now, of course, with our cube that we have here, I actually also want this to be a holdout. So if we enable holdout, I'm going to do GPU here, and then if I scroll down, we're going to enable transparency. But let's make some adjustments to our material that we have. Okay, so the roughness is decently high. I'm going to disable the roughness a bit. Let's do as much as we can here. I'm just going to get some rough texturing on there, and then I might adjust this more on my own off stream. Let's go ahead and create a new material. We're just going to call this bloody, and then hit new image, and it's just going to be a black image here. And if I go to my layout now, I want to load that image into our shader editor. So find our bloody material and then apply that. But if I go back over to texture painting now, should be able to just focus on this knife, and we're going to paint some blood onto this knife from where it's going into the body. Now an easy way of doing that is by using the texture mask functionality. So I'm going to hit new here, and we're going to load in a texture mask. So I'll just load that texture and find open. I'm going to use smudges. I like this smudges probably for this particular one. And because I'm using that under our texture mask here and not under texture, we want to remove it from our texture. What it's going to do is that everywhere it sees the white value, it's going to paint whatever color we have here. Now we're only using the mask functionality of this, so we can probably go in here and just paint in some blood stains that we would expect to get. So we have our original knife material, but then on top of that, we're going to want to have our own blood material. Let's add in a new principled. I'm just going to add in a glass shader probably. This is the easiest way to get the specularities. So we're just going to use glass for right now, and then we'll use a mix shader. Just trying to approximate this. And wherever this bloody material is, we're going to put the glass. We'll put that at the bottom, and the principled BSDF. So now if we view that, should give us kind of like more of a blood-stained knife texture that we can use. Okay, so because we don't have Musgrave, and I don't like the way the other noise textures work, we're just going to paint another one. So let's just do that. We'll call this roughness, new image. And I'm going to load in a new texture. So let's hit new, and then if we select that new texture over here, I can find another surface imperfections that we can load in. So let's add in a new image texture to our shader window over here, and if I load in our roughness, everything will be back to just a black matte. So now if I just paint this, this is going to just rake everything. We're going to want the orientation to be random. Let's use the color ramp over here on our roughness, and we're just going to boost the visibility here to something like that. And now everywhere that's black is not going to be rough, and then everywhere that is white is going to be completely rough. Now the one thing we want to check here is that our roughness is already set to a 0.2. Now this came in from the FBX, but I don't want our knife to be like insanely glossy. So let's see if I can just copy paste that value into here. So now we're just gonna have our gray value and then our very white value. And if I crease that, let's actually just make this a little bit more non-rough. Now I could take this texture here and just feed this directly into our roughness. So let's do that. And voila, that's going to give us a little extra detail that we're barely going to be able to see, but we can kind of see it right there. But I also want to use this under our displacement. So let's use a math node and have this multiply. I'm going to take out of the original texture here. I'm going to multiply this by a higher value. Probably not that, but let's just see what that does for us. And I think it looks pretty nice. Okay guys, let's render this out, and then we're going to want to do the lightened flash version of this shot as well. So let's save that and go to our render settings really quickly here, because we still have to do all of our compositing work. So I'm going to do OpenEXR multi-layer. It's what I prefer to render out as. And we're going to make sure that this is set to ACES CG for our sequencer. And then of course on our render settings here, I'm going to override the color management here and make sure that's set to ACES CG as well. That way, when I render out of Blender and I take it into Nuke, it will perfectly be the correct color. We want to make sure that this is also inside of our lighting reference. And of course, we'll just double check our work when we do that. We want to make sure that it's still lighting our shot like it did before, but we don't want to see it anymore. So if we place it in there, the knife will not change. In fact, actually, this you can see on here that the specularities are still coming through, but it's not visible in our render. We essentially only want to render out the knife as its own separate comp layer. So let's go ahead and render that real quick. Just scale this up real quick. I accidentally it had a keyframe set, and it jumped the blade. Okay, and I think this looks better though. So let's do medium point here if it's rotated slightly. And then I'm going to scale it down as well, just ever so slightly. Now, render it out without the background enabled. Alright, so let's go ahead and save this. We're going to save the image here. Well, I always like to create a new folder called output. If we load this in under output, and I do need to shuffle the combined into the correct channels here. But now we can actually just merge this directly on top of our scene. That should just work. Yeah, that knife is way too small. Okay, perfect. I think that scaling works a lot better. I'm going to save this, and we're just going to save as a new version. Or we can actually, well, let's do it this way. We'll just say, let's call it rig lighting. And we're going to do a full, complete copy. We'll call this, instead of rig lighting, it'll be flash. And so now we have two separate scenes inside of Blender. I'm going to actually go to our world settings here, and we're just going to load in frame 1007, because we know that that's the frame where the light flash does happen for the first time. And if I load that in there, you'll notice that the highlights change ever so slightly on our image here, which is great. Our lighting is just automatically updating for us. But we also want to make sure that we don't need to add in any additional lighting, because it is coming from off camera here. So let's go ahead and add in, we do know that the light changes, an area light. I mean, we know the light changes because that's the only reason we're creating this separate render here. I'm going to just add in an area light and just position it up against the knife here. We're going to turn up the brightness of this particular light. And we're just really trying to catch the specularities as much as possible. I'm going to duplicate it, just rotate this upwards, and decrease the amount of light here. Actually, I like the amount of light, I just want it to be more subtle. So let's just, I'm going to rotate that all the way around here. Let's put this on the other side. Just playing with the light until we could get something. See how that lights up that edge there? I like that, but I want it to be on the opposite side. So let's take the background now and move that down into our lighting reference again. And I'm gonna actually, one more thing. Let's take this light here and then just make this ever so slightly yellow. I'm just gonna render that out. We're gonna do the same thing we did before. I'll just call this version 2 though. Sequences, and then select that as our option. So now we have two shuffles. We're gonna do the same exact thing that we did before, which is just have the A input and the B input here. And it's going to flicker between the two of these depending on the average intensity over there. And honestly, we just copy paste that, that's totally fine. And yeah, so now if we play through it, it's just going to flicker our knife effect accordingly. Let's take this guy, and then I'm going to add an expression where we're going to minus 0.25. This will allow us to adjust the amount of that intensity, because we went a little too far with the amount of our specularity on the knife. Yeah, I think the knife up here needs to have a little bit more of specularity hitting it, because right now it's like you can't really see that. I mean, we're seeing it on the knife pretty nice, but it's not doing too much to our blade up here. So we can fix that by just adding in like a Roto paint tool and then painting in some white. So I'm going to do that. So now with this brush here, I can go to the root options. I think I might be able to multiply this on top of it. So let's go to stroke. And if we adjust the opacity here, this is going to control the amount of specularity that we're really getting on that edge. So I'm going to make sure that this is all set to all frames. And then now, when we go back over here, that little bit there added some paint to our total blade. That's pretty good. I'm just going to follow the top here a little bit more. And great. Set that to all frames. But if we now take this knife, we can add in a light wrap. And I'm just going to make the intensity very slight. But we're going to take the B input here, which is the plate directly before it. And what that's going to do is it's basically going to average out the colors that are from behind it and then place that directly in front of it. The only problem is that it's putting quite a bit of diffuse on it. We don't want that. This is going to add in some nice chromatic aberration to the edge of our blade here. Let's add a merge node in before this Roto paint. I want to remove some of the flicker. If we just merge between the two of these before I do the Roto paint and before the animation happens, I can actually control the amount of flicker just directly that way, specifically on the blade. Okay, overall, let's change the opacity here to like a 0.1. I'm just going to paint in some of this blade here that we would like to see some sheen on. Just an artistic suggestion. Could you add an angle to the blade so it isn't straight up and down? It looks artificial. Sure, I could totally do that. Yeah, I think just adding the transform node there works pretty well. Now let's add some blood in so that way it actually looks like he's not just an android. I think one more thing we're going to want to do, at least since it's CG, is we're going to denoise our original plate that we had. Let's just place that up here, I'm thinking. Something like that. And then we'll just denoise it completely. And then we're going to want to regrain everything at the very end of the whole tutorial. Or not the end of the whole tutorial, what am I saying? We're going to regrain everything at the very end of the whole comp here. I'm going to lessen the amount of red, probably the size as well. Let's just match the red first, and then we can go to the rest of the sequence. Ever so slight amount of grain that we're adding into it. That's all good. Let's go ahead and download both these assets into here. I'll need to apply like an 1886 color operator to this. Utility, let's see, utility sRGB texture. This should work fine, right? Yeah. Okay, and then this grain's going to go at the very bottom. But we can merge our other stuff over top of this. This blood is going to happen before the knife. So this merge node here, we're going to remove for right now. And that's going to go at the very bottom of our stack. I don't need the color corrector. But what I do need is a corner pin. And then we can take this corner pin and place this wherever we want in our sequence. We're going to kind of align the blood on the back of him. And kind of get this lined up a little bit here. And then I want to view where the knife is. Yeah, that's okay. But now that will allow us to place this wherever we want. I'm going to use a time offset here because this is all starting at like frame 1. We're at frame 1000. I am thinking that we're still going to want it to be this far in. And we're going to have to fix some of the lighting issues here between the knife and the blood. Then a trick I like to do is once this is here, we're not going to use the over. Let's see if multiply works for us. What we're going to do is we're going to multiply it. And then we're going to use an additional merge node that's going to merge that over top of our original footage. And what that does for us, if I take a grade node here and I boost the lightness of this, this makes it look more like it's bleeding into the fabric rather than us having to make it feel like it's sitting on top of it. And all the crevices and lines that we would normally get, we're going to be getting. I think we're going to want this to be a little bit darker. Let's go and do that again. So we're going to add another transform node here. Cool thing is, we're just going to use this same multiply for everything going forward. But we're going to merge our other blood into like one layer that we can work with here. After we add another transform node in, I'm going to do a corner pin, and then we're going to do a merge node, and we're just going to merge this here. But if we take our corner pin now, we can drag this to whatever part of the body we want. So I'm thinking that we'll do a corner pin somewhere like here. I'll use another grade node similar to what we had done before. Now, the other thing is I want it to feel like it's following the body downwards. Let's place that there, but it feels like it's going straight right now. So let's add in, we're going to add in a grid warp here, and we're going to grid warp the blood to follow the back down. Let's add in pluses here and just rotate this down. But the cool thing is now we can control the orientation which this blood is following. Now with this though, I'm going to fix the corner pin a little bit, and then let's go back into our grid warp. And now using another similar time offset, let's do that here. Probably not quite 900. Let's do, I want it to be more like that was one of the first blasts she did. Okay, I'm going to take this image here, and a little trick we could do to help with adding some more blood speckles into our scene is let's take this guy, let's take it as an output, and then, sorry, matte painting is basically what we want to do. And we're just going to take this guy here, and we're just going to render him out at 16-bit. We're just going to render out this first frame. No, let's do the last frame. That way the blood is completely in the areas that we want it to be. I'm going to open up some Adobe Photoshop. So what we're going to do right now is that we have this knife kind of sitting here, but it does feel like it's not directly integrated in the scene. Now we can fix that with some blending and some feathering and you know, some general paintwork here. But I've also found is that you do this for free with some new AI tools, guys. I think though, let's use this lasso tool here. If you select around the knife, I have found that this works pretty well. We use generate fill. What we're going to be doing is creating kind of like the intersecting part of the knife and of the blade and the ground here. And now, of course, we can select our shirt here, and maybe we say blood specks. Actually, I wonder, because After Effects does have quite a bit of things that it doesn't like to do because it thinks that they're against its terms of service or whatever. So we may actually have problems with this. But let's see if it'll do blood specks on the shirt. Well, it's creating free dots for us. That's fantastic. Torn shirt. Let's try that. Torn shirt. I like that. That works pretty good. We're going to save this Photoshop file. Now that we have that finished, let's go ahead and import in our matte painting. And I'm going to tag this as our output 709. That should match, well, it should match perfectly. It does, and we're happy about it. So let's go ahead, and what we're going to want to do is we're importing this as basically just a texture that we can apply in very specific areas. Obviously, we did some additional paint work with adding in some more blood and things like that. Now, all I have to do is just isolate those areas in which we did that paint work. And then we can comp that on top of everything. So the first thing, and what the most important thing that we did, is we changed this blade here. So let's just select this area in which the blade intersects with the blood. So now if I select that as just RGBA there, we can actually merge this over top of our sequence. And now we're just fixing that part of the blade there, and we're using this kind of still image as our projection of what we want. The only thing is I want to make sure that, yeah, and this is where we might get some problems here, is that the blood kind of like animates on. We could fix that also just by adding in a blur node here, honestly, and just blurring that out slightly. Not going to see the difference. Let's do a couple of these other options that we have. Let's go back to our Roto here and kind of pick and choose what we want to have in our shot. Let's go back in here, and then we're just going to Roto around this edge here. And we'll Roto around this edge here. And so now this one's not growing. This one's falling down the side of his shirt. This one is getting larger since that's where the knife is currently plunged into. I'm going to add in some saturation, or remove some saturation here. I'm just going to do like a pseudo grade on top of it so we know where this is going. I'll blur this up a bit. And that's going to give us a bit of a vignette too. I don't want to Google stab wounds, but I'm going to. Thinking, another thing we could add in is the actual stab effect. F2, there, so you guys can see what I'm doing here. So I took a image here, and then this is all the camera movement. Let's merge this on top and add in a corner pin to this guy, which we will place specifically on this section here. Let's grab the transform here, and now I can just place this where the actual, and try to match the size of the blade there. And then I'm also going to auto alpha this. Overall, we're going to want this effect to be darker here, so we'll just probably make it a lot slighter, or darker, and then that way it just catches the light a little bit better. Take the gain here and just increase that. I'm going to take this and then rotate it. I think we're going to place that one there, and then we're probably going to duplicate this. So let's just use another transform node and place this all the way at the top. Let's see, at the beginning of the sequence, it's already at that size, so I need this to live within inside of that, which we can totally do. Something like that should be fine. But now let's add another transform node in and just continue the overlaying. And then we can place this wherever we want it. So I'm going to place this back here onto this part of the body. And that's fine for that added detail. I think for this guy here, let's add another transform node in as well. And then we're just going to have to Roto it slightly. And by us merging that over top of everything, that's going to give us the ability to now add another merge node in. I know this is complicated, but the only reason why it is because I didn't set up my project settings to be 2048 by 1080. And so these blood stains are actually like weirdly formatted right now, which is not proper. It's just, it is what it is. So now we're just going to invert that. But now we're only getting the blood like kind of wound effect here, whereas it kind of feels more like it's diverged into the t-shirt now because of that. But hey, thank you guys so much for joining today's video. Talk to you guys later. Bye.